welcome to Fender Play Live. I'm Eugene Edwards, and today we're demystifying distortion. It's a very popular effect, obviously, but there's some tricks to using it effectively, so we're going to give you some tips on how to create and use distortion in your playing. Plus, we'll tell you can win a free guitar later in this episode, so please stick around. Now, helping us with today's topic is return FPL guidance counselor, your distortion guide, Gina Gleason. Gina, say hello.
Hey there. How's it going? What's going on?
Well, what's going on is going to be a very, very fuzzy episode, and we're really excited. I'm excited to see you again, buddy. We had such a great time. That finger tapping episode was one of my favorites. It was a hit with the crowd, for sure. And also, by the way, don't forget, we're joined by Dylan Caligiuri. Say hi, Dylan.
This is a big one. This is a big one. Glad you guys are here. This is big.
I just want to... There you go. See what it does? It gets Dylan all riled up. For those of you that don't know, Gina is a guitarist who's best known for being the lead guitar player for Baroness, a great band. Gina, can you tell us a little bit about the guitar you have there and your gear, and show it off, please?
Sure. Yeah, I'm playing this. This is an American Pro Tele. It's right now. I think the American Pro 2s are out, so this is the one before that. But it rules. I love it. And then I'm playing through a 65 Princeton. That's in the other room, and that's mic'd with a Shure KSM 32.
Wow,
and
cool.
That's about it. And then I have a spaceship here,
right?
Which is cool. Some various distortions. It's a big topic, so I wanted to have some varieties. But yeah, that's what we got going on here. You said
just rip through something. Just rip through something. Whatever you got set up.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn this down a little bit for a sec. Let's see.
Come in, your landing gear is down.
So much. All right.
You guys.
Very
so
cool.
I just actually turned my monitor down for a sec. Yeah, so that's like kind of the main distortion sound.
That'll do just fine.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So you're gonna walk us through several different types of distortion. We're gonna get through to that. But and Dylan, what are you playing there, buddy?
I'll be representing the acoustic community today.
All right. Okay.
No discrimination. Listen, we are an important part of the distortion discussion, and I'll show you.
Can
So
be.
here's
Sure.
Did you want? Here we go. We'll talk more about this.
So it's possible.
It's
big
possible,
question.
folks.
There
is hope.
That's right. Okay, thank you, Dylan. Well, today we're discussing distortion, which is a big topic. So make sure after the show you head to Fender Play for more in-depth distortion lessons. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. We'll try to get to them. I'm sure you have a lot. So let's start out with hearing a little more distortion in action. Gina, can you show us an example? Maybe a lick without distortion, and then the same thing with, just so we can get an A and B.
Sure. So we'll do like a clean tone. My clean tone might be a little quiet, so this has, let's see, turn this guy back on. Let's see, not very clean.
There you go. That's very clean.
It's very clean.
Yeah.
Let's add like a lower drive distortion. So this would be more of like an overdrive as opposed to a distortion. So we'll get into that. A little bit more saturated. We'll go one more up. And then, not quite the same as a distortion, but we can throw like a fuzz into the mix. So we'll talk about that as well. So here's a little bit of fuzz. So
nice.
Yeah, some different distortions.
Okay, so clearly we can hear the difference there between clean and all of those. So let's begin with the basic definitions. Gina, what is distortion?
Sure. Distortion is such a funny word because you can distort a lot of things. You can distort an image. You can distort, a sound wave. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about today. So when a sound distorts, it's getting modified from its original shape. So if you have a clean sound wave that's nice and curvy, a distorted sound wave is going to be sort of compressed. Maybe the top is going to get more squared off or more chopped up. And so that's kind of the basic definition of what is distortion. Well, it's a sound wave and it's been modified, and that modification is going to give us a different sound, a different texture.
There you go. Well done. And then now how did this effect hit guitars? When did that start and how?
Yeah. I mean, so with, I'd imagine with the tube amplifier, which has been around for a long time.
The ages.
The ages. Yeah, like if we have a tube amp, the tube itself in there is like a small amplifier. So it's going to get a signal and it's going to make it bigger. But the thing with tubes is they have a point in which they're going to max out, right? So if we push them really, really hard, they're going to get to that point where they're maxed out, and then they're going to do the best that they can. But the result is going to be this kind of smushed, distorted sound.
There you go. And and eventually we, as guitar players, as human beings, we just thought, wow, this sounds really great.
It's fantastic. Pleases the gods. Yes.
I mean, I always wondered, like early guitar players, I think they used it to try and help emulate the sound of like saxophones or like a lot of like instruments that kind of had that growl to them that were, and then before you, or you can imitate two saxophones. So you get, and you had that little burn there coming from the tube distortion, and it didn't hurt. Plus they probably noticed that you got a lot of more sustain all of a sudden. So we'll talk about why we want to have distortion. Now, you showed us some examples at the beginning, gain, overdrive, fuzz. How are those different from distortion? And then by all means, play examples too, as you describe.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing we could talk about is like the basic construction of an amp and like what is going on with this, and then how things like pedals, or if at home, if you have like a modeling amp, what are these types of things actually trying to emulate? So if we kind of start at the beginning, if you have a clean amplifier, we have our signal that goes in, and it's going to hit the input volume, or it might say input gain on your particular amp. And that knob is going to control how much of the signal is being sent to what's called the preamp tubes. And so we have our preamp tubes, so we could drive the input gain really hard, crank it all the way up, and those preamp tubes are going to start to distort. They're going to do that thing where they're reaching their max and they can't take it anymore, so they're going to do the best they can, and they're going to start to break up. So
may I ask, could you play for us an example of what that type of gain would sound like?
Yeah. So like I said, my amp's in the other room,
right.
And but that would be sort of just an overdriven sound. A lot of times you'll see like an overdrive pedal, and that's kind of emulating the sound of, that point where the tubes are just starting to break up. It's very kind of bluesy sound. So this might be even a little touch too far, but I can actually roll the volume on my guitar back a hair.
Sure.
The volume on your guitar is kind of like the entryway to your whole circuit here. So you have a lot of control with just this one knob.
Okay.
So we have this. We can clean it up a little bit. We don't lose too much volume. So this is kind of a nice overdriven sound.
Yeah, it's got a little body to it. You probably have a little more sustain there. Maybe even a little bit of some little sympathetic harmonics are starting to happen. So we call this the sweet spot, right, Dylan, when an amp's starting to do this?
Yeah, and use that term breakup, which I know, like, for people that are maybe new to guitar, there's a lot of terminology that gets thrown around when you talk about distortion, and some of it's kind of confusing and maybe even conflicting. But breakup is a really common way that guitar players refer to that overdriven clean sound, that amp that's got too much volume going into it and too little volume coming out of it, and so it's sounding broken up.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on to distortion and fuzz, we've already got a couple of questions, so let's not forget where we were. Jonathan Lingo from the Facebook community is asking, what effects just don't work with distortion?
Jonathan?
Are there any bad mixes here?
Which effects don't work with distortion? I don't know. I mean, I haven't come across anything that I'm like, oh, that doesn't really work. Sometimes a sound that's kind of out there, kind of wacky, is like, oh, that was really cool. Not exactly what I was going for, but
well, there's certainly
something different.
effects you can't hear as well with distortion. So any phase correlation effect, like chorus or any modulation effect, generally doesn't work as well. But it's just it's only because you can't hear it as well as all.
But if you make your adjustments,
you can make it work.
Otherwise,
Absolutely.
we wouldn't have My Bloody Valentine.
Or
record.
we wouldn't have the entire 1980 through 1989 period of time.
Right, so it's possible. Also, Mark Petton on Facebook says, "Is distortion only for heavier styles?"
Mark.
Gina.
Sure, yeah, I would say definitely not. Distortion can be for all kinds of styles, and it's not even limited to guitar. You can distort anything. You can distort a kick drum, a snare drum, vocals, certainly bass. So no, I don't think it's something that's reserved for heavy music at all.
And your new album's a good example of how anything and everything can have gain or distortion on it, right?
Of course, we our last record that came out, and at this point, the pandemic's making everything fuzzy.
Right,
came out in 2019, and there's a broad range of ways you can use distortion and fuzz, even just taking like clean DI guitar signals and just driving them so hard that they start to break up and distort. And that just, it's really at that point more about like, oh, this is an amazing texture that's sitting on top of something else that maybe is a little softer or a little less distinct. Yeah.
Like the Beatles guitars on Revolution are plugged directly into a board, and they're overdriving a board. I mean, the tubes in the board, but there's no guitar amps involved in there. Well, let's get back to the definitions before we start talking about how to create this. So you told us about gain. Tell us about fuzz and distortion as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess one thing possibly worth mentioning. So we talked about like we're coming in, we have our gain, we have our input volume, we're hitting the preamps, and then we have what's called like EQ or your tone controls. So that's your treble, mids, bass. So you have some control over that, and then some amps are going to have a master volume.
Yep.
Some amps don't. The amp that I have does not have that. But if you have a master volume on your amp, what you can do is crank your input gain, so you're driving the preamp tubes really, really hard. And then you could use your master volume at a lower level and kind of bring it up so it's not at ear-shattering level.
Right, you're not waking up the kids, but you're getting a really full tone.
Yeah.
And then you can moderate the overall volume with that master volume. Hence the name, I guess.
Yeah. And so what happens after the master volume is you have your power tubes. So these are another set of tubes that are going to help, this is just the next thing in the chain before we're hitting the speaker and actually getting our sound. So there's a couple different types of distortion that you can dial in. You have your preamp distortion, which is what we just described. You're driving the preamp circuit, and maybe you have your master volume pulled down a little bit, so the actual amount of signal going to those power tubes is going to be smaller. If you turn your master volume back up, you're going to have a larger signal hitting the power tubes, and they create their own type of distortion that's really desirable. It's really crisp and clean and powerful. So
can we hear
it's a
that?
nice sound as well. Sure. So again, I don't have a master volume on my amp. So what's happening is my signal's just going straight through. It's going to come in from the cable, hit the input. We'll go through the preamp tubes. It's going to hit that EQ, which I have everything set, nothing extreme, just about in the middle.
Okay.
And then from there, it's going to hit those power tubes. So the sound that comes out is going to be that's what you get. There's no master volume in between. Kind of.
It's the whole amp kind of wide open.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's kind of what we've been hearing. I have that same overdriven sound pulled up here. Also, a lot of control that you can have over using the toggle switch. I was like, what's this called? This has a name, right? The toggle switch. So yeah, much more trebly and like kind of...
Because you're going to your bridge pickup, so it's going to be a brighter...
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, just a nice overdriven sound. But yeah, you were talking about the differences between then distortion.
Yeah, gain,
overdrive,
distortion,
fuzz,
and now
that.
and fuzz.
Yeah, fuzz is really. I'm gonna fix this guy.
Sure.
We got a faller. Yeah, fuzz is one of my favorite effects to use. it was made to kind of emulate things that were broken.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, it's the Maestro Fuzz, one of the earliest, if not the first, fuzz pedal to be created. So that was kind of made in an attempt to reverse engineer like a sound that was discovered through like a channel on a mixing console that had just a faulty connection.
Right.
And it made this really broken up and crazy sound. So a lot of people will seek out fuzz pedals and then unfortunately feel disappointed, like, oh, this isn't exactly what I thought. And, it's kind of like, well, it's made to sound like insane and like something is breaking. So with fuzz pedals, their construction's a little bit different than like overdrive pedals and just classic distortion pedals, right? So our overdrive pedals are going to kind of rely on something called soft clipping.
Yep.
So if we have a signal coming in, it's clean, it's making that, nice round sound wave. The soft clipping is going to sort of cut the tops off a little bit, and that's where we get that broken up sound. With distortion pedals, they're going to utilize something called hard clipping. So the sound comes in, and then the waves are starting to get a little more square
Right.
at the top coming in. Fuzz doesn't so much rely on the clipping diodes as they do the transistors.
So can we hear some fuzz?
Of course, yeah.
Ooh, fuzz time. Okay, this is good.
So I'm going to do just like clean fuzz, and I'll drive it a little bit with a compressor pedal that I have coming before it in the chain, and that's got a pretty sweet, pretty cool sound. There it was. Thing with fuzz is it'll just kind of sustain. It can just kind of live here for a while. It'll keep doing its thing. You can hear the little like sizzles.
Yeah.
That's happening. So this is just the signal dying. This is like my favorite sound. This is very Yeah.
That is definitely one of the most extreme sonic moments on Fender Play Live. Congratulations, Gina.
That's awesome.
All right, thank you.
We should mention there's a lesson on Fender Play called Tone Quest.
Cool.
About distortion, and it for anybody that's newer to the topic, it does a great job of diving into it in a really applicable way.
Yeah.
So if this is something new to you and it's overwhelming all these different ideas, like it's really important to learn how to paint with distortion initially. So check that lesson out; it might help a lot.
No, that's a great point. And talking about tone, we have a few questions, Gina, that I want you to answer, and these are really good. Eileen, who's watching on Facebook, asked,
Eileen,
what about distortion on bass?
Oh yes.
Like when's that appropriate? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, Cliff Burton's like one of my favorite bass players. Yeah, amazing. Definitely experiment with distortion, fuzz on bass. I don't know, Eileen, if you have a favorite bass player or a favorite type of music, but I don't know, just look up some of the classics, look up what they were using, like Cliff Burton. There's definitely a lot of stuff online about like, oh, these are the pedals he used and all that. The big muffs and
even going back to like the early Led Zeppelin records with John Paul Jones is playing he just has a pretty like a amp distortion going on, and he's doubling the guitar riff, so you can really thicken up a riff if the bassist and the guitar player work things out. So that's a great example of where it's appropriate. The intro to Whole Lotta Love. It's not just the guitar; it's the bass as well.
It's the
bass,
bass,
awesome, yeah.
And it
really brings out slides on the bass. It's like if you do anything where you're sliding, where on a bass it could be hard to hear unless it's a fretless bass. Yeah. But it like carries the harmonic momentum between the slide. So I think it's the must-have of any pedal as a bass player. Oop.
All right,
do it. I lead.
Dylan's endorsing it. On YouTube, Leanne Martz it says, I have a question for Gina. Is there a particular pickup that would work the best for high gain guitar tones?
Sure. I mean, obviously, like the bridge pickup sounds really good. You get a lot of those high end tones coming in. So if I just go to like a high gain distortion, we'll go to this guy. Go to the bridge pickup here. We could switch to the middle, which is one of my favorite places to play the tele. I don't know if I have a favorite. I feel like I utilize a bunch of different pickup positions for different purposes, but for high gain, I think the bridge pickup sounds pretty rad.
Okay, there you go. And then again, we encourage you to just kind of like use all the pickups you have and see what you like. Here's a really important question, I think, from Facebook. Mark, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correct. From Mark Arndt, I believe. When I use overdrive or fuzz, I lose all articulation, just a wash of distortion. I can still hear articulation with Gina's tone. So Gina, let's talk about tone shaping with distortion. How are you getting that articulation? I think that's what's happening to Mark happens to a lot of us.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's funny because distortion can almost sometimes like soften things as opposed to making them more articulate. I think another misconception is, we were talking about this earlier too, like distortion doesn't really equal like volume or more dynamics. So it depends, everybody's combination of like guitar and amp is really different.
Sure.
On my like main high gain, like high saturated pedal that I have here, the actual distortion isn't cranked. It's actually like about halfway at this point. So yeah, I don't know. I would try maybe dialing back the gain on I don't know if you're using a pedal or if you're relying on the distortion from your amp. That's something probably worth talking about too. If you have an amp that's got built-in distortion to it, that's kind of the combination of preamp tubes that we talked about earlier that have their own controls that will kind of cascade into one another. So you could drive, preamp tube number 1, it's going to hit preamp tube number 2. You could drive that one, goes into the third one, and now you're stacking these gain stages and getting that really saturated tone. But yeah, I mean, try rolling it back a little bit.
Yeah. Also, I think what if I may encourage, like, especially if when you have more distortion, you might want to roll the bass control back a little bit. I think what happens is, right, Dylan, because when we have more distortion, we're actually compressing things. We're actually losing a little information technically.
Yeah.
And sometimes
eventually you would actually
muddy.
end up at just a single tone if you actually just kept distorting something into entropy. But yeah, it's you lose bass and you begin to lose treble eventually too. So it's like you just end up with a completely compressed volume and frequency signal until it's just yeah.
Now let's talk about creating distortion from amps. Speaking of, since not everybody has the same amp setting, so you were going to talk about clean amp, distortion channels, modeling amps. You mentioned. Can you walk us through that a bit, Gina?
Sure. Yeah. So like I have a clean amp. It's a Fender Princeton, so it's it's not the most complicated amp. Doesn't have the master volume or anything like that. It's just guitar goes in, hits the tubes, has some EQ control, and obviously
not even a lot of that though in a Princeton. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then it's a lower wattage amp. So to me that really works well because when we're playing live, we're typically going to mic our amps, so I can keep the Princeton at a lower volume and have just more control over it with my pedals and stuff like that. So I'm controlling the amount of headroom that the amp is giving me.
Sure.
What we mean by that is just like how much we can push the signal before it's going to start to break up, right? Like how much can we push the signal before it starts to become dirty and start that distortion. So I kind of like that better than some of the higher wattage amps, because if I do crank it to like, 4 or 5, then I'm really getting the most out of that preamp and power tube saturation. Like they're really working hard. I get a lot of articulation that way. And that's really important for us in Baroness, because our frontman, John, who plays guitar as well, we're just constantly playing things in harmony, even like chord progressions. It's like if he's playing a G chord down here, I'm probably doing something similar. I'm probably breaking your TV right now. If he's playing a G chord here, I'm playing it up here. So that we just try to be really conscious of covering like a wide dynamic range and harmonic range on the actual
that makes sense.
Guitars.
Before we talked about distortion channels, I noticed Dylan picked up a bass.
Yeah, I wanted to take care
wink,
of our...
Wink, nudge, nudge.
I don't want let's get back to... here. So.
No, absolutely. Let's hear like bass with a little distortion on it and how that works.
I wanted to show you guys one thing, because there was a talk about like what happens when you turn down. If you just have an amp at home, let's say I turn down the treble all the way, but I leave the distortion up. I'll turn the mid and the treble down all the way. You'll just hear what it sounds like bass going through. So what you start to learn is that different frequencies have different qualities when they get distorted. Here's just the mid-range. And by the way, I'm doing this on this acoustic
nice plug.
Pedal.
There you go.
This is actually really hip, and it takes care of that whole issue of...
Wait, Dylan, I'm sorry, I spoke over it. What's the name of the pedal again?
It's called Acoustic Smolder.
Acoustic...
Sorry, Smolder Acoustic.
There you
Overdrive.
go. Okay.
Final answer. Use that second take. Thanks, guys.
Go nuts.
Anyway, but this is just mid-range. So, and then here's just the high end. So this is really awesome. So try that with your guitar, because what you figure out is that different frequencies distort at different rates, and they have really unique characteristics. That's something you can do with almost no gear whatsoever and find a lot of creativity with.
Thank you for that. That's a great point, Dylan. Now, Gina, let's get back to I think we're going to talk about distortion channels on amps, and then we'll talk about modeling amps.
Sure, yeah. A lot of amps have like built-in distortion. So we kind of touched on a little bit earlier. That's just those preamps cascading into each other, and you're starting to stack, amounts of gain and get, starting to get a lot of saturation and stuff like that. So it's funny because Fender amps, that's what we use live and on the road and in the studio and everything. It's not really a sought after amp for its like distortion.
Right.
They're just great sounding, clean amps that, each model that I've played, they break up really great. They're a great like platform for
your pedals. And
exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't have an amp with built-in distortion that I use for touring or anything like that, but obviously that's super common and they sound awesome too. So that's kind of what's going on with the circuitry. It's those cascading preamps. And
now I use a modeling amp. I use the Mustang GTX for this show. So I'm using basic British 60s, and that's what I'm using for mine. Which is based on like an early 60s British tube amp. And so talk to us about modeling amps and what they're doing. If for those at home that have a modeling amp, and they may not understand exactly how much power they have under the hood there.
Sure. Yeah, so it's like the solid state amp, or the modeling amp was kind of the answer to some of the gripes of like tube amps being like heavy, or not mine because it's a Princeton, but like they get really hot or whatever. So over the years, I think they've improved a lot. Like the software that is involved to emulate all these sounds is really improved. So yeah. So like you said, you had British. What was it, like British 60 something?
Basic British 60s.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe the sound of a Vox or something.
Correct. Yeah.
Like right at that like preamp gain stage. It sounds a little Yeah. It's great overdrive sound. Sounds awesome. If you had, I'm sure there's a setting on there that's like, a metal something. And
there's some really heavy stuff here. So
yeah. So
again,
yeah, that's all. It's just trying to emulate different gain stages, different amps. All amps have different tonal qualities. Even like the Fender amps sound different each one.
yeah, and because you can also change the speaker combination, so that changes the amount of information coming out. You can add pedals in front of, or in fact, let's talk about pedals a bit. We have a question from Eric Silver, our Brooklyn guy, who's watching on Facebook. He's asking, where do you put your fuzz or distortion pedal in your effects chain, and why? So let's use this question to carry over into pedals before we get out of here. What's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's such a thing that's debated so much. What's the order of the pedals? And that's the way I have it laid out is pretty linear. It's like compression, so something that I would use for a clean sound, and like we did earlier to drive the fuzz.
Right.
But compression, and then I would do a low gain pedal or an overdrive. And then I would do like a highly saturated high gain pedal, and that would be like my main sound for a set or something like that, like a live show. And then after that is going to be the fuzz. So whatever, experiment with different orders. I kind of like starting with very low gain, working my way up to the fuzz.
You build your intensity as you're going down the chain, so to speak.
Exactly. And typically the last thing in that order of events is going to kind of have the most influence over your sound, so it's something to take into consideration too. But yeah, the pedals, it's such a deep world, and it can be definitely really daunting. I would definitely want to encourage anybody that has an interest to to not be discouraged by like how much info is out there. Like I think we were talking about this earlier too, like there's a lot of value in figuring out sounds that you don't like.
Yeah, that's right. That'll help you keep the wallet healthy. There is kind of
one great idea is go into a room, mess around with some distortion, and then think that everything you're doing is right. So just give yourself the space to actually screw around with different types of distortion, and just never think that what you did was wrong or you used it wrong. Like I think you'll find that this is a major tool for you to be able to expand what you can do on the guitar, especially if you're new. So don't stray.
Now we have a few more questions, but before we get to them, can we hear some more just heavy distortion playing from you, Gina?
Sure, of course. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just gonna walk through. I'm gonna start with like a low gain setting, and we have one song on a record called Borderlines that I played a little bit of the solo earlier, but it really like walks through gain stages like as it goes along. So this is kind of a low drive. Pickup selectors right in the middle, sound that I really like with the overdrive sound. So I'm going to switch to the neck pickup, same pedal, way different sound. That's just that
just
broken
thank you. Thank you so much.
And the gods were pleased.
Thank you so much, Gina. No, I mean, honestly, is the playing wonderful? But I thank you. That's a very thoughtful demonstration of different tones, all in one big passage. That was fantastic.
Cool. That's awesome.
More questions from Dean Pollock asking: was distortion a happy accident with a horn speaker cone producing breakup? Related.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess we're thinking about Dave Davis and the Kinks.
Yeah, of course. Like cutting it with razors or pencils. I don't know. Yeah. What's the story?
Yeah, that's. I think as he told the story, it got more violent over the years. But I don't know if he was trying to emulate maybe a fuzz, another record that had a fuzz pedal on it, or maybe just tube distortion from an old R&B or blues record. But he certainly knew that he was not happy with the sound coming out of his little amp at the time. And once he made that modification, there's stories about people. Oh, I dropped my amp, and then when I plugged it in, it sounded like this. Distortion stories have a lore, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
is that or what's the Link Ray? Oh, like Rumble.
For Rumble,
like got banned from the airwaves.
Yeah, it got banned because they were afraid that it would start actual street fights. It's an instrumental, by the way. There's no words to it. I don't have, but yeah, just that's how violent that thing sounded. Link Ray, very, very cool.
Yeah, such cool.
Any final tips or tricks for our viewers here, Gina, regarding distortion?
I would say, yeah, I mean, like what Dylan was saying earlier is so true. Like there's no exact way, like this is how you have to do it. Like just try stuff and don't like censor yourself. Don't be like, oh, I don't know if this is right. Like just figure out what you think sounds cool.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I mean, the kind of stacking things in that order, like low gain all the way up to like fuzz, that could be like a cool starting point. Something I like to experiment with different like parts of songs is maybe there's a part with the low drive, like the finger picking sound that we heard earlier. Instead of going straight to the high gain next, I like kind of just stacking the high gain on top of that like lower drive. That gives a different sound. Same thing with the fuzz, like earlier when we were feeding that compression pedal into it and just kind of had that cranked, like that's going to kind of influence the sound of the fuzz pedal itself. So try, putting things in different orders. Try feeding, all right, this one into this one, now these two together. Like try different combinations like that.
And I like with fuzz pedals that I have, I like dialing the actual fuzz pretty low and not maxing it out. That's a pretty interesting distortion sound, even though I'm using fuzz. And that's how I think that's how the Beatles kind of used it that way. Hendrix used it that way. Jimmy Page used it on the early Zeppelin records. It's actually a fuzz pedal, but it's not completely maxed out and fuzzy. So again, within the pedals, you can always be, just kind of changing things around there. Now we have a couple of requests for acoustic distortion. Dylan, could you help us in any way for that?
Tired of bland acoustic sounds, and then
frankly, sometimes it's a new color. Why not?
You know what? There's nothing bland about the acoustic, but I'll tell you what, it could take your playing to the next level. So let's say you're at home and you're really working on the old fluidity, and you're like, I'm just not feeling.
You're just playing Flight of the Bumblebee.
You're playing it. So now I can almost play it. So it's one of those deals where it's really going to add an interesting sound. And honestly, this is the only pedal I've ever seen that adds distortion to an acoustic that does not grotesquely feedback. But let me give you guys a little example here. So it's actually like a really interesting tool. And notice normally if I put a distortion pedal in line on an acoustic guitar right now, it would sound like, and I don't know if NASA was involved.
I think
which space agency, maybe a privatized one.
A lab in Houston.
They were
there's probably some sort of, I don't know what they do, some sort of
I don't know.
canceling thing.
I don't know.
If you have an acoustic guitar and it has a pickup, it has an output jack, there's no reason why you can't put distortion on it, is the point.
That's the point.
Yeah.
The limits are
there you go.
They're gone.
Or like like we saw Kurt Cobain do on the Unplugged, where you just slip a pickup inside of an acoustic, and again that pickup's going to run into something, and you can put fuzz and play, the man who sold the world. But thank you for that, Dylan, and thank you very much, Gina, for all these tips.
You.
I know we've given people a lot of info. Again, we encourage everyone to go to the site, look at those tone lessons, and that brings us actually to homework. We're going to go back to Dylan here. Dylan, it's your turn to shine, buddy.
Yeah, well, so Gina has been incredibly inspiring, right? And shown us a bunch of different ways that we can use distortion to sort of paint an image with as we're playing guitar. And that's the goal that we want you to walk away from here is to be able to utilize distortion to expand what you can do on the guitar. So there's some really big opportunities here. One, if you have a Mustang amp, right? So if you have a Mustang amp at home and you have the Tone app, the Fender Tone app, you can download the presets that we've created that emulate a lot of your favorite songs that are on Fender Play, and you can see how the chains were made, what amps were used, and their characteristics. And it's a great place to start from because you can start to paint using others' paintings as your guide, right?
It's a template.
It's a template, right? And so if you have a Mustang amp, we want you, this is the Fender Play Homework Challenge. We want you to create your own distortion effect in the Tone app and save it. So that's going to take just a little bit of effort, right? And then share the Tone name within the Fender Play community. You'll see there's a big green share button. You can share it.
I have used some of what would you call them? The user created tones. I've used them on this show before, actually. So
user created. That's you guys, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. I steal it from you.
So maybe you'll hear it. You'll become famous in Eugene's mind. And so basically, we want you to upload it to the Tone library, to the Tone app, and save it and tell us. Share it on the community. Tell us. But we want #mytone to share. #mytone. That's the big important thing, right? #mytone. Create a tone using the Tone app. Share it on the Fender Play community. Okay. If you don't have a Mustang, that's okay. Don't fret. Anyways, create your own distortion using amps or pedals, whatever you have, and film yourself, right? So you're going to have to film yourself playing a note or a chord or a lick, wherever you're at and you're playing. That's not the point. We want to hear what you created, right? We're really thinking about your colors here, and post that to the community and explain why you did what you did so that we can all kind of share about in this whole process. Same thing, #mytone. When you post it to share.
That's a different type of homework, but it should be a lot of fun. Very communal. Okay, so now it's time for the Fender Play segment.
Oh, good. Thank you.
We're going to start giving stuff away.
Okay, so if you guys are new to this, every week, I wish we had Gina here every week. We don't. But every week, we give away a piece of gear to a lucky Fender Play subscriber. And all they have to do is simply use Fender Play for a minimum of 3 7-minute sessions. So they're automatically entered to win. And hopefully I can call your name at the end of the episode. So you get to pick from guitars, amps, ukuleles, pedals. There's all kinds of stuff on there to make distortion. So, and we pick the winner every week. I'm going to name this person now, but I would like a very distorted, highly harmonic distortion.
Gina?
Chaos-filled intro.
You got this, Gina? Can you give him like a...
yes.
Go for it.
Oh, yeah. So we doing a G? Is it a G?
No, not yet. You're just giving him like kind of a...
Oh, yeah.
We're conjuring the winner now. Here we go. Harry K. Harry K. Harry K. That's right, Harry K. This distortion's for you, Harry.
I love the chaos of this. Harry K, congratulations. Enjoy your guitar bass, whatever it is you choose. Dylan, what else have you got for us?
New stuff on the site. Constantly new stuff on the site, especially new songs. We've got a new country collection. So we've got Kerosene by Miranda Lambert. There's a ton of songs on there, as well as the tools you need to be able to play those songs. So preceding the songs is the stuff you're going to need to know how to learn how to play them, so you can step into them with confidence. Also, a big new one that's on... anyways, it's Good Vibration by the Beach Boys. Don't use my... There we go. You got it, Eugene?
That's a little bass intro there.
There you go. That's it. Nice. That's it right there. So we promise it'll be more climactic. Anyways, Good Vibration by the Beach Boys is now on the site. So make sure you check that out too. And always the What's New row in the songs.
There you go. Enjoy that. Thank you so much, Dylan. And Gina, thank you so much for helping us with distortion.
Thank you so much.
I think we dispelled some myths. We helped some people. We may have saved some lives. We want to hear what you have coming up. What do you got to plug?
Hey, if you guys just check out Baroness, it would be yourbaroness.com.
There you go.
Or just on, whatever you use, Instagram or that, or Spotify for sure. And yeah, check it out. Let us know what fuzz tones you like the best on the Baroness catalog. But just check it out. Really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to hopefully getting to play some shows at some point soon. And
Right.
Totally.
Yeah, check out the new album, and I think you guys will be playing live pretty soon, hopefully, so everybody should rush out and see it and watch Gina and John. That's a great clinic on how to arrange guitar parts, and that could be a whole episode there. So thank you so much, Gina, and for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us on this long episode. Keep safe, keep practicing, and we'll see you next week at the same time and same bat channel. Let's now go out on a distorted G chord. Acoustic guitars included. 1, 2, 3, 4.